and welcome to Miss Hannah Loves Grammar. In this video we'll be exploring some of the central ideas at the core within the metaphysical poet Andrew Marvell's poem To His Coy Mistress. So, Marvell was a Yorkshire poet who had a political reputation that eclipsed completely his poetic works, during his lifetime at least. He lived at a time of huge political instability, and in his lifetime he saw the dissolution of the monarchy at the helm of Oliver Cromwell, and also its revival with Charles II. His poems were actually first published after his death in 1681, and were found by his housekeeper, who also claimed to be his wife. There is no truth in the latter statement. Marvell has been seen to be a satirist, so someone who plays on society's virtues, and he adopted very different styles, from odes to Cromwell, and that was a very classic move. He seems a classicist for that. His attitudes also mirror very elegant cavalier poets, very strong in their response as to why the king should still be in charge. And yet his nature poems, they really echo Puritan, Platonist attitudes. So he took both sides and was ever the politician in his poetic forms. For this specific poem, though, we have an impatient speaker who urges his mistress to abandon her false modesty and give in to his embrace before death robs them of the opportunity to love, or more importantly, perhaps for him, lust. There are two concepts at the heart of metaphysical poetry, and I've mentioned them once before, but I think it always needs a recap. The first is called memento mori. It's a Latin term that actually means remember death. Okay? It translates more precisely as remember, for you have to die. It's based on a medieval theory, a Christian theory at that, of reflection on the transience of life and mortality. Essentially that when you're dead, you can never change what has happened, so why not enjoy every moment of living and never have a regret? A twinned concept with that is carpe diem. The belief, as it translates directly from Latin, is pluck the day, or seize the day as we commonly use it today. And life ultimately is for living, is what the sentiment is shared here. So you should have no regrets, you should enjoy each day and be proud of it. Those concepts move malleably through this poem, and so it makes sense for us to now begin exploring its title before we come back later to those concepts. So, To His Coy Mistress. The mere title To His Coy Mistress has a certain detachment from the poet himself. It almost implies a critique of the speaker will form a part of our interpretation as readers. The fact this is not a wife but a mistress implies something sordid between the speaker and the lover. Additionally, the adjective coy hints at flirtation that is false, a modesty and shyness that should not be trusted. I think it's interesting that we have a critical interpretation of this mistress before we've even read the poem. Had we but world enough and time, this coyness lady were no crime. We would sit down and think which way to walk and pass our long love's day. Thou by the Indian Ganges side shouldst rubies find. I by the tide of Humber would complain. I would love you 10 years before the flood, and you should, if you please, refuse till the conversion of the Jews. My vegetable love would grow vaster than empires and more slow. 100 years should go to praise thine eyes, and on thy forehead gaze. 200 to adore each breast, but 30,000 to the rest. An age at least to every part, and the last age should show your heart. For lady, you deserve this state, nor would I love at lower rate. So from the onset, this stanza shows the logic of the argument laid out by the speaker. Ideally, if he had the time, he would spend eternity loving her before indulging in sex. So really this stanza serves as a what if. What's interesting though is, even if he had world enough and time, he would do that. But as he doesn't, in the second line there is an accusation of this woman being coy. We do not hear her voice, yet we can hint the resentment in our speaker's voice. It's lovely to see the verbs associated with slowing down, sit down, think, walk. And that's amplified further by the alliteration of our long love's day. Time is there associated with indulgence. Time he does not have. Memento mori, for we must die. There's the conflict there as well with the image of her by the exotic Indian Ganges with rubies and him by the Humber complaining. That contrast of rubies versus complaint definitely does hint at the reality maybe being different from what he's alluding to already. We then move into, within this stanza, quite a series of biblical references that take place, well, the first one of 10 years before the flood is from early in the Bible, in the Old Testament, with Noah, and the exaggeration and the impossibility of if there was enough time, he would let her refuse him all the way through till the conversion in the Jews, which is a very far moment in the Bible. There's also quite a controlling sentiment, I think, of the speaker, that he would wait if he could, but he can't wait. In that reference to another biblical moment, we see how this is quite manipulative to get what he wants. Then we turn to the phrase, my vegetable love would grow. Now, it's quite comic, I think, for its phallic implications of passion, but also he's suggesting that if he had the time, he would allow affection to grow. He doesn't really have that time, though. Yet again, throughout this stanza, now it's with empires that are vast. Time and size are exaggerated to fixate us on what he would do to win her heart, if he could. We also move into a blazon here, actually, where he says, 100 years should go to praise thine eyes and on thy forehead gaze, 200 to adore each breast, but 30,000 to the rest, an age at least to every part, and the last age should show your heart. Now, a blazon is a set of features, normally that are body parts that are shown as qualities. And in those lines, we really get a sense of where his real interest lies, in lust. There isn't that much said about her personality. Eventually, he gets the idea of her heart. At the end of this stanza, his high ideals are outlined, and the promise he is hinting at. But it's interesting to note that love is only mentioned once. Or twice, sorry. But not enough in any real depth. But at my back I always hear time's winged chariot hurrying near, and yonder all before us lie deserts of vast eternity. Thy beauty shall no more be found, nor in thy marble vaults shall sound my echoing song when worms shall try that longed preserved virginity. And your quaint honour turn to dust, and into ashes all my lust. The grave's a fine and private place, but none, I think, do there embrace. So stanza 2 serves as a nice counter-argument of his hopes and dreams if he had the time in stanza 1. Here it is, the sound of reality kicking in. The urgency of the speaker, he seems completely bound by time. It's out of his control, but memento mori, time rushes on. He needs this to happen. It's almost God in God's hand, time's winged chariot hurrying near. It's interesting, the image of the deserts of vast eternity. A desert is devoid of life. And it's interesting, the desert, it contrasts the image of life of the rivers, be it Humber or Ganges, as seen in stanza 1. The image of her in a marble vault signals the loneliness of death. I think it's also quite aggressive imagery that worms would try to eat at her in the grave. That exaggeration or image is also pervading something more. What follows with this long-preserved description of her virginity? Well, society would have expected women at the time to preserve their virginity, but actually there's an urgency here for her to lose that with him. And that contrast is quite pertinent. He's almost patronising as well. The tone of quaint honour turned to dust. He's like, it's all in vain. Nothing good comes from waiting. I also think that the idea of his ashes, and into ashes all my lust, Along with her death is buried his lust, and it's all consuming. The major sentiment to take away from this stanza is, after we are dead, there is nothing to fear. There's no link. You can't avoid it. Memento mori, essentially. Don't have a regret for still being a virgin. It's a very knowing wink at memento mori here, but also carpe diem as acknowledged here. Embrace it, embrace life. I think he's quite arrogant. The use of the phrase "I think" at the end of this stanza, but none I think do their embrace, is also quite patronising. He's like, well, it's not worth it. You might as well get rid of your virginity now with me. It's not really remotely romantic. No mention of love here. Now therefore, while the youthful hue sits on thy skin like morning dew, and while thy willing soul transpires at every pore with instant fires, now let us sport while we may, and now like amorous birds of prey, rather at once our time devour than languish in his so-chat power. Let us roll all our strength and all our sweetness up into one ball, and tear our pleasure with rough strife through the iron gates of life. Thus, though we cannot make our son stand still, yet we will make him run. This is the synthesis of his argument. He's drawing out here his real intentions. He's keeping it real. It's interesting that in the first two lines of this third stanza, the superficiality of his interest in her looks is really laid bare, with youthful hue and the fact that it's on her skin like morning dew. But maybe it's also signalling his admiration for what her youth really is. As we move further, when he says, now let us sport us while we may, it's really an implication of asking for sex, isn't it? It's really his way of saying, well, why not? Let's just do it. And the simplicity of the simile that follows of like amorous birds of prey, the image of animals following their instincts, is the image he's using because he's suggesting it's natural and there's nothing to stop them. The use of the verb devour on the following line acknowledges both passion and primal desires of lust, and once again is trying to say nothing is wrong with that. I think it's interesting that he uses inclusive pronouns like let us roll our strength and all our sweetness into one ball. He says let us, but really he has the control and the power in his argument through the imperative mood. You get the impression, were this to actually happen, he would dominate it. Equally, there's some quite aggressive language with tear our pleasure with rough strife. Also iron, not known for being malleable, quite a strong metal. But really, the iron gates of life, this is about carpe diem. This is about you can't stop time. Let's live while we can. And that final couplet does it so well. Thus, though we cannot make our son stand still, yet we will make him run. More than anything, this is quite ironic. It's dedicated to a woman who is coy. And so he sees her ability to get corrupted and he's tempted by it. Marvell equips himself well with many of the traits of our metaphysical poets. It's clear to see memento mori and carpe diem as traits in action, but the rhyme scheme of the couplets really mirror the control and the constant reiteration of his key message. Each couplet shares a new idea and symbolises seeking to make two become one. His desire is for them to become two in one. Also, the couplets suggest a false veneer of sophistication to hide his very blatant, bare desires. Each stanza seems calculated, be it on flattery, harsh reality, and the heat of passion. Like any great metaphysical poet, there's an element of sarcasm in the tone, and passion and power that pervades it. It's interesting to think that this poem was not published in his lifetime, yet is his most famous poem by quite a long way, and it's a very influential poem in terms of what its key messages are about love, sex and relationships.